Matt adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, watching Vanessa's reflection behind him. She stood by the living room window, her phone in hand, typing furiously. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, styled just enough to make her look effortlessly polished. She had claimed she was heading out to help a friend in distress, but Matt couldn't shake the feeling. Something was off. "You really going out tonight?" he asked, feigning nonchalance as he grabbed his car keys from the side table. "Yes, I told you. Claire's having a tough time, and I promised I'd be there for her," Vanessa replied, flashing him a saccharine smile over her shoulder. "Don't wait up. It might be a long night." Matt studied her, noting the subtle details, the way her fingers lingered on the phone screen, the faint floral perfume she only wore on special occasions, and the overly careful selection of her chic dress, a deep blue that hugged her figure. Vanessa had always been good at lying, but she was slipping. She wasn't expecting scrutiny, and Matt intended to capitalize on it. As she grabbed her clutch and turned toward the door, Matt followed. "Say hi to Claire for me," he said, leaning in for a kiss. Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second before pecking him on the cheek. Matt waited by the window, watching as she slid into her car. The headlights illuminated the driveway as she reversed out, and he couldn't resist the gnawing suspicion that this wasn't a selfless act of friendship. She hadn't mentioned Claire in weeks, and her demeanor tonight was too calculated to be casual. Matt grabbed his phone and stepped into the kitchen, dialing Claire's number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Hey, Claire. Sorry to bother you, but Vanessa said she's heading over to see you tonight. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay," Matt said, keeping his tone light. There was a pause. "Vanessa, I haven't spoken to her since last month. Is everything all right?" Matt's grip tightened on the phone. "Yeah, must have been a mix-up. Thanks, Claire." And in the call, he felt the first surge of adrenaline. She was lying. The thought hammered in his chest, making his breath quicken. Matt slid his jacket on, grabbed his car keys, and stepped into the cool evening air. He wasn't going to sit at home stewing in doubt. If Vanessa had something to hide, he'd uncover it. He followed her car at a safe distance, weaving through the city streets until she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant. She emerged from the car, looking around as if to ensure she hadn't been followed. Matt parked far enough away to remain unnoticed, but close enough to watch as Vanessa strolled into the building. Minutes passed before he stepped out, adjusting his tie and smoothing his hair. He approached the restaurant cautiously, peering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. There she was, seated at a candlelit table with a man. Tall, sharply dressed, and leaning far too close for a platonic dinner. Matt's pulse thundered in his ears. He took out his phone, snapping a photo of the two before retreating to the shadows. The truth was out. Now it was a matter of timing and execution. Matt wasn't just going to expose Vanessa's betrayal. He was going to make sure she and her lover would never forget the moment they were caught. Matt leaned against his car in the dimly lit parking lot, his thoughts racing as he stared at the restaurant's glowing entrance. The sight of Vanessa laughing softly, her hand briefly touching the arm of the man seated across from her, replayed in his mind like a bitter loop. This wasn't just dinner. It was intimate, calculated. Proof of everything he had dreaded. Taking a deep breath, Matt opened the Notes app on his phone and began documenting everything he had seen. Time, location, Vanessa's description, and a short description of her companion, tall, sandy-haired, and sporting a designer suit that screamed arrogance. The act of recording the details steadied him, anchoring his swirling emotions. If he was going to confront her, he needed to do it right. No impulsive decisions. No room for deniability. From his vantage point near the restaurant's entrance, Matt observed carefully. The couple was seated near the large windows, oblivious to the world outside. Vanessa's body language was damning. Leaning in, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of excitement and guilt. The man, confident and suave, rested his hand on the table, fingers brushing against hers with calculated ease. Matt's jaw tightened. The scene felt surreal, like he had stepped into someone else's nightmare. A part of him wanted to storm in, make a scene, demand answers. But another part, the quieter, more strategic part, held him back. This wasn't the time for raw emotion. This was a chess game, and he had to play his moves carefully. Stepping away from the entrance, Matt dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Chris, an old friend who had pivoted into private investigation. The phone rang twice before Chris answered. "Wow, it's been a while," Chris said, his tone friendly but surprised. "But no time for catching up," Matt replied tersely. "I need your expertise tonight." Chris whistled low. That serious? Hey, I'll cover your fee, but I need you to get down here now. I'll text you the address. That, on my way. Matt ended the call and leaned against his car, the weight of what he was about to do settling heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about catching Vanessa in a lie. It was about ensuring she couldn't talk her way out of it. He'd learned from experience that Vanessa was adept at spinning half-truths into plausible excuses. 30 minutes later, Chris arrived, his camera bag slung over one shoulder. A wiry man with a keen eye, he gave Matt a quick nod. Okay, fill me in. Matt pointed toward the restaurant window, keeping his voice low. My wife, Vanessa, blonde, blue dress, sitting with the guy in the suit. She told me she was helping a friend tonight. Clearly, that's not what's happening. Chris adjusted the zoom lens on his camera, his expression hardening. Got it. You want stills, video, the works? Everything, Matt said firmly. And make it clear. No blurry, ambiguous angles. I want undeniable proof. Chris smirked. You're paying for the best. That's what you'll get. While Chris moved into position, blending seamlessly into the bustling environment, Matt remained in the shadows. His heart pounded as he watched Chris snap photo after photo through the restaurant's windows. At one point, Vanessa laughed, throwing her head back, her hand grazing her companion's. The man leaned closer, whispering something in her ear that made her cheeks flush. Matt's grip tightened on his phone. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the ease with which she carried it out, as if their years together meant nothing. Chris returned 15 minutes later, his face unreadable. Got plenty of shots. They're pretty damning, if you ask me. She's definitely not helping a friend. Email them to me, Matt said, his voice low and tight, and then send a backup to my work address. Chris hesitated, his professional demeanor softening. You sure you're ready for this, Matt? These things can get messy. Matt met his gaze, his expression resolute. I'm ready. I have to be. As Chris left, Matt returned to his car, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The evidence was in hand. Now, it was time to plan his next move. But even as he tried to focus on the logistics of confrontation, a wave of pain surged through him. How long had this been going on? How many nights had Vanessa lied to his face, spinning stories of errands and obligations while meeting this man? The betrayal wasn't just in her actions, it was in every smile, every kiss, every shared moment that now felt like a carefully curated facade. But Matt knew one thing: he wasn't the kind of man to let deceit go unchecked. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The morning after his discovery, Matt sat at the kitchen table, his untouched coffee cooling beside him. The events of the previous night played on a loop in his mind. Vanessa's laughter, the man's confident smirk, and the damning photos now sitting in his email inbox. He scrolled through the images, each one a fresh stab to his chest. There was no denying it now. The betrayal wasn't just imagined. It was a fact. Matt exhaled sharply and set his phone down. He knew what he had to do next. Confronting Vanessa in the privacy of their home would give her control of the narrative. She'd cry, deny, twist her words into a weapon against him. No, this needed to happen on his terms, where she couldn't hide or manipulate. It had to be public, deliberate, and unforgettable. Over the next few days, Matt meticulously prepared his plan. He started by keeping his behavior unchanged around Vanessa. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. She continued with her usual routine, smiling as she left for errands and returning home late without offering much explanation. Matt watched her closely, every move a confirmation of her deceit. One evening, he casually asked about her plans for the weekend. Vanessa barely looked up from her phone. Oh, nothing special, she said, her tone light. Might meet up with Claire again. Matt's heart clenched, but he forced himself to nod. Sounds good. Let me know if you need anything. She smiled at him, calm, composed, and utterly duplicitous. On Saturday evening, Matt sat in his car, parked across from the restaurant where Vanessa had arranged her meetup. This time, he knew exactly what to expect. He had checked her texts earlier that day, finding a thread with the name L that was anything but subtle. Can't wait to see you tonight, was all he needed to confirm. Matt adjusted his tie and checked his phone one last time. The photos and videos from Chris were ready, stored in an album he could access with a single tap. He'd also printed copies, clear, vivid images that left no room for denial. They sat in an envelope on the passenger seat. next to a small recording device he planned to use for the confrontation. The restaurant was bustling with activity when Matt entered, blending into the crowd of diners. His eyes scanned the room until he spotted Vanessa and her lover Liam seated at the same table by the window. They looked like a perfect couple, their body language oozing comfort and intimacy. Liam leaned forward, saying something that made Vanessa laugh, her hand brushing his wrist. Matt clenched his jaw and approached the hostess stand. "Excuse me," he said with a calm smile. "I'm joining some friends, but they're already seated. That table over there," he gestured toward Vanessa and Liam's table. The hostess nodded and handed him a menu. "Right this way, sir." Vanessa froze mid-low when she saw Matt approaching. Her smile faltered, her eyes widening as she quickly pulled her hand back from Liam's. Liam, oblivious, turned to face Matt with a puzzled expression. Hence, Matt's voice wavered, her cheeks flushing. "What are you doing here?" Matt ignored her and set the menu down on the table, sliding into an empty chair. He glanced at Liam, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "So," Matt said evenly, "this is the friend you've been helping all these nights?" Liam's face paled, and Vanessa stammered, I can explain." Please do," Matt cut in, his tone sharp but controlled. He pulled out his phone, opening the photo album. He swiped to the first image, a candid shot of Vanessa and Liam holding hands across the table. "Because this looks a lot like a date to me." Vanessa's face drained of color as Matt flipped through the photos, each one more damning than the last. Liam glanced around nervously, noticing other diners turning their heads. The restaurant's hum quieted, the tension drawing attention like a magnet. "Matt, please," Vanessa pleaded, her voice low. "Not here." "Oh, I think here is perfect," Matt said coldly. "You lie to me, Vanessa, over and over. But more importantly, you disrespected our marriage." Liam tried to interject. "Look, man." Matt turned to him sharply. "Don't. You've done enough. Let me guess, you thought you could swoop in and have a good time without any consequences?" Liam's mouth opened, but no words came out. Matt reached for the envelope, pulling out the printed photos and spreading them across the table. "You can't talk your way out of this, Vanessa. I have evidence. I've got everything." A murmur rippled through the nearby tables as diners craned their necks to see. Matt didn't care. This wasn't just about humiliating Vanessa and Liam. It was about reclaiming control over a situation that had spiraled out of his hands. "Here's how this is going to go," Matt said, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to pack your things and leave. I'll send you divorce papers by Monday. And Liam," he leaned closer, his eyes narrowing, "stay away from me. Both of you." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but Matt stood, sliding his phone into his pocket. The confrontation had served its purpose. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving Vanessa and Liam to face the judgment of the room. The cold night air hit Matt's face as he stepped outside. For the first time in weeks, he felt a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a start. He had taken control, exposed the truth, and ensured that Vanessa's betrayal wouldn't define his future. As he drove away, Matt felt a small flicker of something he hadn't expected. Hope. He was free now. Free to rebuild, free to heal, and free to leave the lies behind. Matt drove home in silence, his grip on the steering wheel tightening as the city lights blurred past. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, but the surge of adrenaline that carried him through it was fading, leaving behind a quiet ache. He replayed the scene in his mind. Vanessa's panicked expression, Liam's feeble attempts to interject, and the stunned silence of the restaurant's patrons. He had expected to feel triumphant, vindicated even, but all he felt now was empty. The house was dark when he arrived. Vanessa's shoes weren't by the door, and her coat was missing from the rack. She hadn't returned yet, and for that Matt was grateful. The stillness of the house felt like a reprieve, giving him space to think. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly as he brought it to his lips. As he drank, he stared at the empty chair across the table, Vanessa's usual spot during their quiet breakfasts. It was a small detail, but the sight of it tugged at his chest. Their life together had once been full of those small, shared moments. Now, Matt sat down and opened his laptop. The photos and videos Chris had taken sat neatly in a folder on his desktop. He clicked through them slowly, each image a confirmation of what he already knew. Vanessa's betrayal wasn't a mistake or a fleeting lapse in judgment. It was deliberate, calculated, and sustained. He closed the folder, unable to look at it any longer. The following morning, Matt woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification from Vanessa. He hesitated before unlocking it. "Vanessa, can we talk? Please." He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. A part of him wanted to respond, to hear her excuses and explanations, but he knew it would lead nowhere. He placed the phone face down and got out of bed, determined to focus on anything but her. Matt spent the day cleaning the house, each task grounding him in the present. He packed away some of Vanessa's things, clothes she had left draped over chairs, the perfume bottles cluttering the bathroom counter. He didn't throw anything away, but he couldn't bear to look at them either. The act of tidying up felt symbolic, like he was reclaiming the space for himself. By mid-afternoon, his lawyer called. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, guiding Matt through the next steps of the divorce process. It was a sobering conversation, but one that solidified his resolve. This chapter of his life was ending, and he needed to prepare for what came next. Later that evening, Matt received another message from Vanessa. "Vanessa, I'm sorry for everything. Can we meet just once?" He stared at the text, the anger he thought he had buried bubbling back to the surface. What could she possibly say to undo the damage she had caused? What explanation could justify the lies, the deception, the public humiliation? And yet, curiosity tugged at him. He needed closure, even if it meant giving her a chance to speak. Matt agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a park they had once frequented during the early years of their marriage. The irony wasn't lost on him as he parked his car and saw Vanessa waiting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. She looked smaller somehow, her usually confident posture replaced by a slouch that mirrored her guilt. "Matt," she began as he approached. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Thank you for coming." He nodded but didn't sit, choosing instead to stand a few feet away. "Say what you need to say." Vanessa twisted her hands in her lap, her eyes darting to the ground. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I never meant for things to get this far. I never meant to hurt you." Matt crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "And yet you did." Repeatedly, she looked up at him, tears pooling in her eyes. "I was selfish. I thought I could have it all. A stable marriage with you and whatever it was with Liam. But it was a mistake. He doesn't mean anything to me. You do. Do I?" Matt's tone was sharp, cutting through her words. "Because it sure didn't feel that way when you were sneaking around behind my back." Vanessa flinched but didn't look away. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make things right. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, any—" Matt took a deep breath, the weight of her plea settling on him. He had loved her once, deeply and without reservation. But the trust they had built over years was gone, shattered into pieces he couldn't imagine putting back together. "I don't think there's anything left to save," he said quietly. "I've made my decision. I'm filing for divorce." Vanessa's face crumpled, and for a moment he felt a pang of guilt. But he knew this was the right choice, for both of them. Staying together would only prolong the pain. Without another word, Matt turned and walked away, leaving Vanessa on the bench. As he reached his car, he felt a strange sense of relief. The confrontation had given him the closure he needed, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was his to navigate. Alone, but free. The days that followed were unexpectedly quiet. For the first time in years, Matt woke up without the weight of Vanessa's presence lingering in the house. It was an odd feeling, both liberating and somber. He hadn't realized how much of his life had revolved around her until she was no longer there. Matt poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out the kitchen window. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over the yard. This used to be his favorite part of the day, the stillness before the world woke up. Now it felt like a blank canvas, waiting for him to decide what to do with it. His thoughts drifted to the stack of divorce papers on his desk, ready to be signed. The decision had been made and there was no turning back. Yet, as he looked around the house, the photo frames on the wall, the small trinkets Vanessa had collected over the years, oh, he couldn't help but feel the echo of what once was. For years, their life together had seemed unshakable. They had built a home, shared dreams, and weathered storms, but all of that felt like a distant memory now, eclipsed by the lies and betrayal. Matt knew he couldn't change the past, but he was determined not to let it define his future. Later that week, Matt called his sister Clara for a long overdue conversation. Clara had always been his sounding board, the person he turned to when life became overwhelming. As soon as she picked up, her warm voice cut through his lingering sadness. "Matt! It's been ages. How are you holding up? She asked, concern evident in her tone. I've been better, he admitted, leaning back in his chair. But I'm getting through it, one day at a time. They talked for over an hour, Matt filling her in on everything that had happened. Clara listened patiently, occasionally offering words of encouragement. By the time the call ended, Matt felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, Matt began piecing his life back together. He threw himself into work, taking on projects that reignited his passion for problem solving. His colleagues noticed the change. Matt was more focused, more driven than he had been in years. Outside of work, he found solace in rediscovering old hobbies. The guitar he hadn't touched in over a decade was dusted off and brought back to life. Evenings were spent strumming familiar chords, the music filling the empty spaces in the house. It wasn't a cure for the pain, but it was a reminder that life could still hold beauty. One weekend, Matt decided to tackle a project he had been putting off for years, renovating the guest room. The process was therapeutic, choosing paint colors, assembling furniture, and transforming the space into something new. It felt symbolic, a tangible way to reclaim his life and make it his own. As the months passed, Matt found himself connecting with people in unexpected ways. He joined a local hiking group, drawn by the promise of fresh air and new scenery. The trails became his sanctuary, each step a reminder of his strength and resilience. It was on one of these hikes that he met Anna, a freelance photographer with a quick wit and an easy laugh. They struck up a conversation about the trail, which led to discussions about travel, art, and life. For the first time in a long while, Matt felt a spark of genuine connection. The friendship grew over the weeks, and while Matt wasn't ready to dive into a new relationship, he appreciated Anna's presence in his life. She reminded him that healing didn't have to be a solitary journey, that joy could be found in small moments shared with others. One evening, Matt sat on the porch, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The vibrant colors painted across the sky seemed to mirror his emotions, a mix of lingering sorrow and quiet hope. He thought about the man he had been before Vanessa's betrayal and the man he was becoming now. He wasn't the same, but maybe that was a good thing. The pain had forced him to confront his own strength, to reevaluate what truly mattered. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, Matt knew he had the tools to face whatever came next. As the stars began to dot the sky, Matt made a silent promise to himself. He would no longer dwell on the past or let the betrayal define him. His life was his own, and he was ready to move forward, not as a victim, but as a survivor. For the first time in months, Matt smiled. Not a forced, polite smile, but a genuine expression of hope. The future was unwritten, and he was ready to write it on his terms.